Welcome to Sunday Night Prime. I'm Father Andrew Apostoli, member of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's program, a program that I'm sure you're going to find very interesting and important. Before we get into it, just a little reminder, I want to welcome everybody to this program, but at the same time to mention to you, if you have any questions or comments, even suggestions for programs, send your emails to sundaynightprime@EWTN.com. That's sundaynightprime@EWTN.com. I've been getting a lot of wonderful suggestions for programs and questions, and I will be dealing with them. In fact, I'll be filming another program soon on the mailbag. But tonight we want to be speaking about a very, very important topic, and that is the topic of Christian culture. Let me read to you a quote from Pope John Paul II. He said this at the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia in 1976. He said, "We are now standing in the face of the greatest historical confrontation humanity has ever experienced. I do not think the wide circle of the American society or the wide circle of the Christian community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between Christ and the Antichrist. This confrontation lies within the plans of divine providence. It is therefore in God's plan, and it must be a trial which the church must take up and face courageously." And this is the struggle that we find ourselves in between Christian culture and the secular world. And the Holy Father goes on to say further on in that quote, when he said what's at stake is the whole Christian culture that's built up for 2,000 years. And so it's a great struggle. And we're very privileged to have tonight someone who has written a wonderful book entitled Rebuilding Christian Culture. And this program, we're going to hear from our special guest tonight about what brought about this struggle, what brought about the decline of Christian culture, and how can we rebuild it. It's my privilege to welcome to the program Ryan Topping.
Thank you, Father.
It's my pleasure to have you here.
Very good to be here.
Yeah, just to give you the people a little background to you know who you are. Ryan was born in Saskatchewan in Canada.
That's right.
He lives now with his wife Anne, and there are 6 boys, and there's another child on the way. They live in New Hampshire. And Ryan is also a college professor there. He received his doctorate from Oxford, and now is a professor of philosophy and theology at Thomas More College in New Hampshire. So it's a real pleasure to have you on this program, Ryan.
Thank you.
And I know, just sharing a little bit before the program, your insights and so helpful, going to be, I know, so very helpful. Well, I know, Ryan, you and your wife are converts to the faith. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We're both of Mennonite extraction. Do you have Mennonites around here?
We do, yes.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, often when people hear Mennonite, they think of horse and buggy. And unfortunately, that's not the sort of Mennonite we grew up with. Otherwise, we would have never left, because I would love to drive around a horse and buggy. So we grew up this way, and the Catholics that we knew there weren't many Catholics that certainly I knew, and they were usually the kind that you'd want to evangelize. They drank more than everyone else. They were like fish, and they caroused, and they generally didn't know anything about their faith. So for ourselves, for myself personally, Catholics were maybe a step above pagan, or aligned with maybe the Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that. So very far removed from our experience. And so that's how we grew up. We went to college, and while in college, I was studying philosophy. And the problem is, if you read old books, you're going to bump into the church. Even if you don't have Catholics in your neighborhood, you can't help but meet Augustine, St. Thomas, or the Crusades, what have you. Mm-hmm. So really it was through books that I first came into contact with Catholic civilization, with Catholic culture, and I fell in love, I would say, with the beauty of the faith, at an arm's length. So reading the Divine Comedy by Dante, or learning about the cathedrals, all of these things seemed overwhelmingly attractive compared to the kind of life and faith that I knew before. Well, after graduation from college, I was studying. My wife was studying still to be a school teacher, and I was pastoring on the side as well at our congregation. And at this time, we lived in a Christian commune. It was a lot of fun, and like a lot of young people, our faith was eclectic in that we knew we were groping for something more, something solid that the evangelical Mennonite church wasn't offering us. So we lived in this community. It was a lot of fun. We had we prayed the Liturgy of the Hours in the morning together. So Mennonites really, Father, actually are often described as lay monastics, and I think it's an apt description. They live in a less worldly kind of life.
That's right.
Maybe more simple in their approach to theology. Not that there aren't many complex monastic theologians there are, but it's a more direct, pietistic kind of approach, at least in the first instance. So we lived in this commune with a few other people, and we prayed the Liturgy of the Hours, and we had these weekly Bible studies where philosophy students, anarchists would come visit us. And at the end of that experience, we realized we cannot stay Protestant anymore. So the question formulated itself this way: where's the fullness of the faith? Where's the fullness of the faith? We didn't think it was in the Protestant world, so we thought the only two places left to look are within Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism. We knew a little bit more about Catholicism than Orthodoxy, so we spent about 2 years worshiping alongside the Eastern Orthodox. And this was obviously by God's providence and grace, and God bless the Orthodox world. They are close brothers to the Catholic,
yes.
Catholic believer. And as a Protestant, being able to worship in an Orthodox church allowed us to encounter the Blessed Virgin Mary, icons. We learned to kiss, to bow, to have smoke rising in the midst of our prayers, and all without the prejudices that we would have when confronted with the Catholic Church. So the Orthodox have no crusades. The Orthodox have no inquisitions that we know of, ignorant as we are. So it's really a special grace that God allowed us to have contact with Orthodoxy. We would never have become a Catholic, become Catholics.
It's like a stepping stone.
Exactly, a stepping stone. And so this was our condition. We went then to Oxford, where I was studying. We were able to spend time with some fabulous Orthodox people like Callistus Ware, who's a bishop there, and learned a great deal. But the question, nevertheless, in our minds was, where can we find the fullness of the church? And we didn't feel like that was capable to be answered to in the Orthodox world, because it's divided for all sorts of reasons. Now, I'm not talking negatively about Orthodoxy. That's not my point.
It's just your experience.
That's right. And we came to realize that we need the Pope. Now, along the way, we had stumbled into an NFP class. That is a course that taught natural family planning. This is not something that is encouraged in the Protestant world generally, but we were converts. We loved it. We couldn't believe that. Why hadn't we been told about this before? There's no chemicals. It's completely natural, and people who use natural family planning generally stay married. Here's a statistic: in the general population, about 1 out of 2 couples will fail. For those that use natural family planning, it's between 0% and 3% of those couples will fail, depending on the study you're looking at. So to our minds, we thought, this is fabulous. We get to respect the woman's body, the natural rhythms and so forth, and it promotes communication, etc. So these two experiences really came together, the quest for the true church and natural family planning. Eventually we met some very intellectual Catholics that led us on deeper into faith, and by providential design we were able to land in Rome for a pilgrimage just as John Paul II had died. So the last stumbling block for us, as it were, was, could we possibly raise a Catholic family? Are there places for kids to develop their faith in the Catholic world? And being in Rome with 5 million other Catholics helps us to see that that is possible.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that was a long journey. And you were experiencing then something of what you later would put into your book on rebuilding Catholic culture, because in some sense, some of the things you had experienced early on were negative, held you back. You
Yes.
know, it didn't give you that openness. And God used the experience of the Orthodox faith to, again, let you see Christianity, but without those things like the Inquisition and
Yes.
Crusades that may have had some very negative appearances and, been obstacles, to your coming freely, So it's really good. And then, did it not also, when you wrote your book on rebuilding Catholic culture, that the book in there, what was your purpose then in writing that book? What led you to doing that?
Yes. Well, we came back to North America, and I had a little bit of time. The position I had allowed me a chance to write. And I set this time before the Lord, and I asked, what could I do profitably for you? After we came back to North America, of course, we were on fire for the Catholic Church, in love with her mysteries, and we knew nothing of her blemishes, so to speak. And then we came back and we realized, oh my goodness, there's this cultural history that we've been walking through as a church, where in fact a large majority of people don't know their faith well, and sometimes the liturgy is not said in a reverent way. Obviously, that's changing, thankfully now. But so the question was this: when you become a Catholic, you sign a check which is blank. When you become a Catholic as an adult, you say, "I profess all that the Catholic Church believes." Now, the Pope could well define a new dogma, but you signed a check. So what you're doing is, on the one hand, agreeing to certain propositions, true, but on the other hand, and even more significantly, what you're doing is you're entrusting yourself to an authority.
That's right.
The Church, God, the authority, as mediated through the Church and her teaching organs. So when I put my faith in the Church, what I'm not doing, and this is something I know to my non-Catholic friends I try to impress upon, what you're not doing is saying, I believe in this priest. Of course there's a proper reverence, and God uses the priest, but your faith is not in a priest. Your faith is in God.
That's right.
So what I wanted to do is ask, the question in my mind was, well, we've signed up. We've written the check. What have we signed up to? So I wanted to rethink, if I could, by God's mercy, the ramifications. What would your sex life look like if you were a believing Catholic? What would politics look like? What would you think about the arts? What would you think about ethics? So my goal in writing this book was really to provide a mere Christianity for Catholics. And that's what I try to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very important, yes. Because, like you said, we don't put it in this individual priest or that one, but we put it in God, who has revealed, his teaching, his truth through the Church, and continues to guide it. Stormy as the ship of the Church has had a stormy history for 2,000 years, but has been able to build up a certain amount of culture and values that have, in the Middle Ages it would have been Christendom, where the external society was recognized as being governed by Christian values, and that's where we see most of our struggle today, don't we? With the Judeo-Christian values that helped to form, for example, America, now being shattered by things like abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, even religious freedom, at stake.
That's right.
So that's a very, very important thing. Well, we've touched on some very important things here, Ryan, but we're going to take a little break now. And when we come back, it's very important, we'll get into the topic of what is culture, what is Christian culture, and why is it under attack today? Okay? Well, we're going to be leaving you for a moment, but don't leave us. We'll be right back. Okay? to Sunday Night Prime. I'm Father Andrew Apostoli, your host for today's program, and our special guest is Ryan Topping, a professor of philosophy and theology at Thomas More College in New Hampshire. Ryan, we've been talking about your Catholic culture, and you've written that book. I just want to let our viewing audience see. It's entitled Rebuilding Catholic Culture, How the Catechism Can Shape Our Common Life, and from Sophia Press. You had a great quote. One of the people who did a little quote for you, Michael O'Brien, a famous author.
Fellow
sure.
Canadian.
Huh?
Fellow Canadian.
Fellow Canadian, yes, that's right.
That's why he was gentle in my book. He was sympathetic.
All right, yeah. And he wrote this as very, very wonderful encouragement about the book. This extraordinary book should be read by every Catholic priest, parent, pastor, educator, politician, in fact, everyone. So that's an endorsement, that's for sure. And well, we've been talking about, Catholic culture. We need to really get into explaining to our people what is culture, and what is this battle, and why is it fragmenting here?
Great. Well, why don't we take that term culture
Sure.
itself as a starting point? So, as with a lot of terms, it's useful to look at the history of the word. In fact, our language is like an encyclopedia. If you look at terms, you break them apart, you learn a great deal. So the word culture comes from a Latin word cultura, and it really has two different meanings. And both of these meanings feed into what we mean by culture. So the first one is where we get this word cult from, as in worship. The second is cultura, as in cultivation. So you cultivate bacteria, you cultivate your mind, and so on. So both of these elements play into what we mean by culture. The ancients have this idea that we are what we worship. We often say we are what we eat. I think better to say we are what we worship. What did they mean by that? Well, that is to say, whatever you think is highest, whatever you think is the most noble, the most beautiful thing, you will reverence that in such a way that, in fact, you become to imitate that thing. You pattern your life in the image of the gods, in other words. I think then culture represents, or it provides an echo for our worship, or what we think is most valuable. Take an easy example. If you look at the architecture of our cities, ask yourself, what is at the center of any city in Europe, South America, in North America? What's going to be at the center of that city if it was built, let's say, before 1920? Well, it's going to be a parish church, or likely a series of churches along the main street. Perhaps if you're in New England, you might also have a library up there, near very, very bookish in the 19th century. So whatever you think is most valuable, you'll tend to elevate it in your architecture. Then think about this. What is it that we have in more modern cities? What do we put in the center of our dwellings? They're not churches anymore.
Right.
In fact, it's
closing them.
We're closing them,
yeah.
And it's nearly impossible. I know this from some experience, to be able to gain permits to build a church in the center part of a city, even if you had space. Well, what do we put there? We put banks, or we put investment firms. Now, I'm not against banks. Banks are important, but they're not all important. They're penultimate. You should throw them out in the suburbs. Worry about money then. So this idea of culture is absolutely fundamental, and has these two aspects: worship. The other side is cultivation, and it's what makes us different than the beasts. God gave us reason and intelligence. So cultivation is what we add to nature to make us civilized, or cultured, or humane. Mm-hmm. That's I would say the beginning of where you'd want to begin a discussion on the nature of culture, and Catholic culture in particular.
So the Church, for a couple of thousand years, has been pushing culture in various societies to put God, Christ, at the very center, to have Him mold our lives. And that's why
Precisely.
we ended up with Christendom in Europe.
That's right. Exactly. And culture, really, the battle is, there's a battle of ideas, and we should talk about that too. We'll maybe say something next about that. But for most of it, I mean, how many astrophysicists do you need in a town? Maybe one or two. How many theologians do you need in a town? None. One, maybe, or two. Very few of us read academic books in theology, philosophy, physics, what have you, and thanks be to God for that. That it'd be kind of perverse if we were all reading academic theology. But we all need to find God, and we all live and dwell in buildings. We do things with our time. We raise families. We step into churches. It's through these means, through the music, the texture, the color, the smoke of culture, that most of us, most of the time, are brought vis-a-vis the body to the invisible cause of all things, that is the Almighty God. So it's a neglected area. Think of a few other examples here. For instance, shopping on Sundays. If you're a faithful Catholic, and this isn't to point fingers or condemn, the Church is very clear about the fact that we should not engage in non-necessary work on a Sunday. Why is that? Why is that important? Well, it's because we have 6 days to worry about our material interests. They're important. We need money to buy things. Religious orders need to be supported by benefactors. This is all important work. But man is not made for bread alone. And that's why he gave us the Sabbath, so that we remember we've got a destiny. We're going somewhere. We may need to buy vehicles, but the vehicles are only to get us someplace, and then you leave them behind. Mm-hmm. And what we've forgotten is that we're going somewhere. We've accepted the philosophy that life is a journey without a destination, and it's proved disastrous for culture.
Right. They've taken God out of that picture, right? The whole secular view of life. And so many people have bought into this today because forgetting that God is our destiny, people are stopping short. It's like instead of getting to the last stop on the trip where
Yes.
my destination, I'm willing to stop short of that and just enjoy myself here,
That's right.
And it's so very important. So, in this here, I know you mentioned also the obvious problems that are troubling, the signs that are troubling our fragmented culture.
Yes.
And you speak about two humanisms, in conflict in the West. Would you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well,
what does humanism mean?
What is human? That's great. What is humanism? Well, obviously it comes from the word human, so what is common to man as man. Mm-hmm. And humanism, it comes into our language in about the 14th century by Petrarch. Petrarch is the first humanist, you might say, and he was a devout Christian. He had a great love for the Latin language, and he thought there was a decay in culture, by which he meant there was a decay in our ability to speak and write well. So that's where the original term comes from. And he wanted a new birth of culture, a new birth of language, taking as its cue the classical models. So the original discussion about humanism is actually a discussion about language and about books. Mm. Well, Petrarch was not against the church, but quite quickly in that period, or shortly after him, there was the idea that perhaps we could build a new culture, a new civilization, looking back to the ancients, that could skip over the influence of Christianity. Mm. So perhaps we could do something where we played leapfrog culturally, yes, and looked back and built again off of what the Greeks and Romans did, but forgot what Jesus Christ influenced in between. And really this explosion happened most forcefully in the Protestant Reformation, where in classical Protestantism, Luther says things like, Aristotle is theology as darkness is to light. It's a very harsh view on reason and on culture. Mm-hmm. What he wants is to go back, not so much to the ancients, but to the Bible. Now, Catholics have never thought that's an acceptable proposition. Why is that? Because in the Catholic view, God gave us both reason and revelation.
That's right.
So there's a wonderful figure, it's from the Old Testament, where from the Exodus actually, where the Jews are about to leave to move towards the Promised Land, and on the way for their journey, they steal the golden pots of the pagans. Mm-hmm. They take them in their bags and they use them for new ends. They sanctify them, as it were. And this figure, the idea of stealing from the Egyptians, becomes a commonplace for the church fathers. Augustine will use it. And it's applied really to the whole of the vast treasury of human wisdom and knowledge and learning that comes before the advent of Christ. And Augustine's view, and the church took this on, was that all of this is ours. If it's true, it's belonging to the church. All truth is God's truth.
Yeah. Well, there's only one God, and
there's only one God.
All truth comes from God. Yeah.
Precisely.
Finding Christ among the pagans like that. Yeah.
Yes. Now, so we've got reason, and reason is free to roam. And what's true in Buddhism is something that can be taken onto us. It's actually the atheists that have the difficulty. They're the ones that have to be wagging their fingers around, looking at the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Muslims. In fact, anywhere where they aren't atheists, they have to say that that's fundamentally premised on a lie. The Catholic Church doesn't have to say that. Fundamentally, man is a religious being. He longs for God. And if we don't have God, we're going to scratch around and bow down before something else. So we've got reason, we've got revelation. Well, what happens is in the late Middle Ages, you've got this separation, this divorce between within reason. Really, it's a war within the mind. And what we're living now is the consequence of this fight that happened maybe decisively 200 years ago. Now we think of reason as being only applying to facts. So we think in the world as divided. We've got facts and we've got values. Reason can tell us about facts. It can tell us about material things. So we can build airplanes, computers, we can count, we can add. Whereas values is the realm of opinion. It concerns things we can't see. So if you accept this view, think about what you're accepting. You're accepting the view that reason can tell us about material things, but reason cannot tell us at all about God, about ethics, about art, about my sex life. Now, if you accept this view of the world, this view where you've got facts and values, you can't think as a Catholic.
In what way?
Well, because Catholics have a more expansive view of reason. Catholics do not say that reason is this tiny tunnel, or it's a small microscope through which we can view only material things. I'll give you an illustration. I was having a debate recently with an engineer. There was a talk, he heard a talk of mine, and he said, well, that's all fine and dandy, but of course you can't know anything about what you can't see. So we had this discussion. I said, you don't believe that as an engineer. Of course he doesn't believe that. Why? Because in order to be an engineer, you need mathematics. Can you touch numbers? Can you smell numbers? Can you taste numbers? Have you ever seen a number 7 roll through the room?
That's right.
Of course you can't. So the study of the natural world, so the sciences, it depends upon a prior knowledge of something that's immaterial, namely mathematics. So in the Catholic view, the Catholic world is always trying to heal that divide, heal that bridge between faith and reason on the one hand and facts and values.
Wasn't that Pope John Paul's letter, Faith and Reason?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
He wrote a whole encyclical devoted to it. He said the crisis of our age is the crisis of truth. And Benedict echoes this. If we don't fight, if we don't win that cultural battle on the level of truth, really everything else you say becomes a moot point intellectually.
Yeah. Well, it's so very important that, that we be able to present truth, but in a reasonable way that people can come to discover God. Through, God gave us that intelligence to be able to view the world, and through the world we come to God.
That's right.
The Creator is manifest to us through His creatures, and we'd be in great danger. We'd end up with a kind of fundamentalism,
Precisely.
Which all you can do is quote, if you quote the Scriptures, but if you don't quote the Scriptures in understanding how it applies to our lives and live it out, and that's why, many who don't understand the Catholic Church will start to say, well, where did they get all this theology and so on like that? Well, that's reason starting to look at what God revealed and put it in a good order. And the same thing is when you look at life, when you look at the world around us, to see the purpose for which God has put us here, you know? And that begins to build a kind of culture, like you said, something that we have an attitude of God, and we can see God expressed through his creation. I always like St. Francis with his beautiful canticle of Brother Sun.
Yes.
You know, praising God through the creatures that he made. Ryan, we're going to have to take a little break here. Don't leave us. We'll be right back. We've got a lot more to talk about and how we can rebuild our Catholic culture. Welcome back to Sunday Night Prime. I'm Father Andrew Apostoli, your host for tonight's program, and our special guest is Ryan Topping, who is a professor of philosophy and theology at Thomas More College in New Hampshire. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, Ryan, and we've been touching now on the importance of culture. And let's go on. In your book, you mentioned family, and how you say it's there's a great battle against the family. Can I quote from your book here? Okay, this book, Ryan's book on rebuilding Catholic culture. You wrote this, the masters of social media have long perpetuated prejudices against the family that, unchallenged, lead to its ruin. Among the several prejudices we could cite, here are three. First, the assertion that marriage makes men and women less free. Second, the assumption that children are a burden. And third, the insistence that sexual differentiation is a fiction. These three ideas represent, as it were, three waves of the anti-family movement of the past 150 years.
Yes.
The first is the Marxist contribution. The second is the eugenicist. The third is the fruit of recent gender theories. That's a powerful, powerful statement, Ryan. Could you break that down for us and explain how you see these three waves? I like that expression, three waves against the family.
Yes.
And how we should understand this and what we've got to do about this.
Yes, all right. Well, unfortunately, social conservatives and faithful Catholics are often about 2 steps behind in the culture wars, and in this case we're about 150 years behind. So these three waves, we look around, why are so many families divorcing? Why is there such confusion about the nature of marriage and so on? Well, really the seeds of this conflict have been planted quite a long time ago, about 150 years ago. So it begins with Marx, really, and Marx said that, it was right in 1850, he said that the original cell of slavery is the family. It's a remarkable statement. What he meant is that the first place where we see radical inequalities, and hence slavery, is when a man and woman join in marriage. And he thought that women become slaves of men because they're not able to make as much money as men, because they have babies and have to nurse children, and hence they can't be working the way that men do. So there's the first wave, the first prejudice, as it were, that if you're not making as much money as your husband, you're a slave.
Yeah,
you're not happy.
They miss the complementary thing that one completes the other.
Precisely. Yeah. You tell my wife that she's a slave. Well, she'll tell you something, or tell me something. So Catholics need to recognize that this is what's being claimed and certainly proclaimed in universities.
Isn't this where a lot of the radical feminism too is taking?
It comes from Marxism directly, exactly. So we'd want to challenge that assumption that the unit of measurement between a man and woman is money. Catholics want to say, no, what makes us equal in the eyes of God is virtue. First of all, we're equally made in God's image, and secondly, the way that you perfect yourself is virtue, not through your cash.
Mhm.
So we want to
That's right.
challenge that assumption. Second wave, yes, the eugenicist wave. So here, Margaret Sanger is the person we'd want to look to. And in the first wave, the canon is aimed at men. In the second wave, against the family, it turns against children. And just think of the logical progression. If men and women become unequal because of family life and babies, well, babies come into the world, they're a pain in the neck. We've got a few of them at home, and you often have to be up at night. You're tired. You a little bit grumpy, and you have to work through it. It's really where you gain your spurs and get to heaven is through that
That's
battle.
right, that's right.
Now, monks and nuns, you have to take special vows to be poor, to be chaste, and married couples, if you're blessed to have some children, then you get that too. Usually through children, poverty and chastity. Anyways, so it turned from the canon turned from women to babies, and the fulfillment of that eugenicist movement, creating the perfect society, was you might say 1973, Roe versus Wade. Yes. Where now abortion becomes legal. And one of the Supreme Court justices, I think this is the Casey case, says directly, our society is, we've become used to abortion being a backup for birth control, and we need birth control so that women can compete with men in the economy. That's almost a verbatim quote from one of the Supreme Court decisions. So that's the second phase.
That was the old, you remember that Equal Rights Amendment that they put in? I read some of their literature, the people who put that out. They were trying to get women out of the home because they said a woman will want another child.
Precisely.
Get her out to have to work. You know, it's all like a conspiracy, isn't it?
In a way it is, actually.
Yeah,
In a way it is. It's a coordinated effort, and it's been going on for 150 years. I lived in the Soviet Union for a while. And as a young man, it was remarkable to me that in the Soviet Union, they of course pay for daycare out of the state's fund, and kids are pulled out of the family right away into these state institutions. And why do they do that? Well, they did that because they knew the family is the one strong center of opposition against a government if it turns bad. So they thought, where then do we have to strike? In the family. As the family recedes, the state has to move in. And the Soviets knew that, totalitarian states knew that. Why don't we realize that?
We're seeing it now, you know, even the preschool, all that
That's right.
stuff, you know, forcing, getting kids out of the home as soon as possible, which takes them out of, from under their parents' influence, protects them from a lot of, who knows, indoctrination that they can get. This is a real eye-opening thing here, Ryan. Very important for our people to realize that.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you went to a third one there?
And the third one is really, actually Pope Benedict talked about this in his last Christmas homily. He said that, he didn't say the third wave, but the third wave is now we've attacked women, we've attacked babies, and now we're attacking the idea of maleness and femaleness. This is the third and final wave, and most fundamental, really, because it's attacking the very notion of being created. It's saying, instead of you being created as a man, male, a woman as a woman because of God's design, we're rejecting the very notion of a creator, and we're putting ourselves up in place of God and saying, no, my will can decide if I'm inwardly a man or a woman or something in between. And this really is the final phase of the long war against the family, where our very humanity is under attack.
Rejecting Genesis, is it not? Had male and female, he created them in his own image, you know, and then he joined them together.
Precisely.
Yeah, this is, you can see those three steps. Very clear the way you enunciated it historically, how it's developing.
Yes.
But I always felt some of this stuff was, again, a big conspiracy. These were aims, these were goals that people were thinking about, as you say, 150 years ago, but it's only materializing gradually.
Yes,
but we have to really stand up. Now, what can we do in terms of the family education? I know you touched on that as very, very important.
Yes. Well, the battle for, the Jesuits have this saying that if I get the boy till he's 7, I'll show you what the man looks like. Mm-hmm. It's very sensible. Why? Because to change an old man's views, you might have to kill him.
Beat him over the head, maybe. I don't know about killing him, but beat him
something like that. Yeah, throw him in jail. To change a young man, to make him into, let's say, an eco-environmentalist activist, all you have to do is send him to kindergarten and make sure you've got control of the curriculum. So the battle for culture is inevitably going to revolve around education. This is true historically, it's true in totalitarian states. Once Hitler takes control, he immediately grasps control of education. Prior to that, in the 19th century, in Prussia, people often don't remember that. In the 19th century, half of the bishops in Germany, in Prussia, were either in prison or in jail. Why? Largely over the battle for education. And we're going to see a battle like that ensue. In fact, it's already being engaged. So we need to get ready and expect that.
Yeah. Very important, yes, we must present the truth as the only thing that can resist this darkness, these distortions, because they're distorting human nature. They're distorting what God created. And that's the only way we're going to find our humanity.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned also, too, about the beauty in the liturgy. That seems really attractive. You share that. I know you shared a story of someone you felt.
Yes, yes. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There are these three transcendentals, three concepts that the Church has taught are always appealing to us: the true, the good, and the beautiful. And the true, of course, relates to theology and philosophy, ideas. The good relates to good works. So think of, here we've got St. Thomas Aquinas, here we've got Mother Teresa. The beautiful, well, that's, we might think of Fra Angelico or the great artisans in the Catholic tradition. These are three different appeals, three different ways that God woos us back into his arms. The true, the good, the beautiful. Mm-hmm. Now, in a culture like ours, where most young people, not where I teach it's fabulous, but I've taught in many other universities, I would say about 95 of them are cultural relativists. So they don't think that truth exists objectively. Mm-hmm. So, of course...
That's the conspiracy, what is it? No, the tyranny of relativism, right?
Precisely.
Pope Benedict always talked about,
Yes, that's
there's
right.
no truth. We got to have
There's
truth.
no truth. It's hard to engage someone like that philosophically. You can, but it's difficult. People are often cynical about good works. So I don't know if you recall this, Father, but when Mother Teresa's diaries came out, then she recorded her dark night of the soul. And,
that's right.
And how she, for years and years, didn't feel the love of God in a tangible way. She knew God loved her, but she pressed on, she worked, even though she didn't have that warm feeling.
That's right.
And people mocked her for that in the secular press.
Yeah.
So we're cynical even about good works. What's left? What's left is beauty. Mm-hmm. Beauty has the power to penetrate past our mail, our armor, and our prejudice. Exactly. Mm-hmm. It often doesn't it grabs us by the face, even when we don't want it. You can't help but be moved by a beautiful piece of music or the grandeur of a cathedral. I have a story. A friend of mine, she grew up as an atheist. Two parents were psychologists, both atheists, and religion was mocked. Well, they took her when she was about 15, as a teenager, to the symphony, and she heard there one of Beethoven's symphonies, bum 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 bum, mm-hmm. and she'd never encountered beauty like this before. Well, she went home at night, as she tells the story. She went home at night and she got by her bed and got on her knees and couldn't help herself but say thank you to God. She didn't know what God was. She wasn't sure that he existed, but she thought, if there's beauty like this in the world, there must be something beyond the world to cause such glory. Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, actually, beauty is the rope in. And this is one reason why we need our liturgies to be gorgeous, to be sensual, to be appealing to smell and to sight, because it's what attracts us. Theology is one thing, we need that, of course, but that comes later for the most part. What attracts us is beauty.
Yeah, yeah, it's very true. You hit a nail on the head. I know Pope Francis has been talking about that, the importance of that beauty, and because the soul is made for that. It lifts you up. I know one Catholic artist. I told him I love his music, and I said it really stirs my soul, and it really gets me psyched up, so to speak. And he said, well, most people think my music is very, consoling and comforting.
Okay.
I said, no, I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean like, a lot of jazz music or something high beat, upbeat and all that stuff. No, there's something about the beauty of your music that resonates in my heart, And it's how often, we are attracted, even to go back to truth there. I couldn't help but think, as you were speaking, of Edith Stein, Saint Teresa Benedicta.
Yes.
She was, for all purposes, she was Jewish in background, but she was kind of an atheist at some point as a philosopher there in Europe. And she happened to be visiting a friend, and while she was waiting for the friend, she picked up Saint Teresa of Avila. In 48 hours, she read everything Saint Teresa of Avila ever wrote, and she simply said, this is truth. This is truth. And that's the way it hits us, truth, goodness and beauty. And certainly with Mother Teresa, I mean, the good that she did, many people saw that. Unfortunately, some people, when she did put out that book, I remember people were saying,
Come Be My Light, I think is the title of that book.
Yeah.
Come Be My Light.
Yeah, and remember, she says that she had no sense of God, and people were saying, well, she's an atheist. They have no idea of the dark night of the soul.
Yes.
Absolutely no idea.
And Father, you've taught mystical theology for 20
some years.
I've
done a lot with St. Teresa and a little bit of St. John of the Cross, yes.
Precisely. Isn't it odd that often as we progress in the spiritual life, we tend to feel like God is more absent at periods.
Yes.
And you feel disoriented and you wonder, where's God? Well, God hasn't gone. He's simply, he's drawing us closer to him by the harder road. He wants our affection. He wants our will, even when we don't feel his presence.
Because when you have that confidence through faith, it is amazing as God leads us to do his will. Many of the saints would say that, you try to grow in holiness by doing God's will faithfully each day as you know it, and a great peace comes into the soul. And you have to think of the words of St. Paul when he said, the peace of Christ goes beyond all human understanding and keeps our minds and hearts set on Jesus. That's a great greatness, which comes along, that peace comes along with that beauty, that goodness, that joy. I always say, people in the world, they have pleasure. There's no doubt about it. Pleasure, they got money, they got, sensual things, but they don't have joy. Not the joy of the Holy Spirit. That comes in the soul, and that's why, as we grow closer to God, it just resonates with us. Well, you know what, Ryan, we're going to be running out of time very quickly, but what are some practical solutions? You gave me a little 3-point formula before the program.
Yes.
On what are some of the practical solutions our people can do to restore, to rebuild this Catholic culture?
Yes. Well, sometimes I talk about beads, books, and babies.
Beads, books, and babies.
Beads, books, and babies. What is a plan of action? Beads, books, babies. Obviously, any renewal that we're going to find in the church in our own lives, it has to have its foundation in prayer. Why? Because it's not our battle, it's God's battle. It's, as St. Paul says, a spiritual war that we're involved in. So without prayer, there's nothing that's going to charge the effort. And beads, well, prayer is one thing, but we all need to grow in a habit of prayer. So I remember I had a friend, another Jesuit actually, was interested in becoming a Jesuit, and the first thing his director said is, you need a discipline of prayer.
Yes.
So pray your daily rosary, go to Mass as often as you can, regular confession. That's the first thing.
That's absolutely essential. Yeah, without prayer we can do nothing.
And habitual, regular prayer in the home. I know in our family we pray the evening Vespers with our boys. We've got lots of little kids. Yeah. And so as parents, as John Paul says this beautifully, he says, parents have the unique privilege of initiating children into the life of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And those early habits, it's like wax. You as a parent, I'm a father, I have that unique privilege of impressing these habits. And even if they reject the faith,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they'll be, which I hope they don't,
No.
they'll be rejecting something that's ingrained into their personality.
Well, you had a beautiful picture of your family, and I'm sure all of our viewers would like to see your family. It's a wonderful picture, Ryan. And so
Yes,
we ask blessings
very
on your
blessed.
family.
Thank
We
you.
just got a minute or so
Yes.
now for the program, but is anything you want to just sum up, anything on the babies and books? I'd just like to put this little quote here, too, from Pope John Paul.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe the last thought I would have is the really education is the place where you want to, as parents, as grandparents, encourage families to invest in education, especially Catholic education that is faithful to the Church. I love teaching at the place I'm at, and there are other schools like Thomas More College where faith becomes part of life.
Okay, we're going to have to come to the end of this program. It's very, very interesting and very, very important. But let's offer a prayer. Ryan had talked about the need of prayer, and Pope John Paul had also said prayer, especially the Rosary. So let us end with a little prayer and blessing. Lord Jesus, we ask you to bless not only our nation but the world, and restore Christian culture for all of your people and all those who do not yet know you. And I bless all of you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, we come to that part in the show now. You've heard a wonderful program tonight about the importance of restoring Christian culture. We're in a battle. I mentioned that quote at the beginning of the show, and when Pope John Paul said, many people are not even aware it's going on. I think they're more aware now because they're seeing how, life, how the family now, freedom are under attack, and we just have to be strong and restore, the values, education, and so on, as we talked about, and so important to recognize the restoring of the dignity that God gave us. Well, if you're going to get this message out there, EWTN is the loudest, one of the loudest voices, if not the loudest, getting this message out in the work of evangelization. Please support it with your prayers and your generous donations as much as you can. God love you all, and it's been a pleasure being with you.